still here? It's over. Go home.
Shalom. Welcome, Bruchim Abiyim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You have found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up a little Torah together. Starting with, it should be no surprise that the great prophet Ferris Bueller makes multiple appearances in Stirring Torah. And by prophet, of course, I mean prophet of what to do as a result of life moving pretty fast. If you haven't seen the movie, you're going to miss a lot of references, so go and watch the movie. After watching a mere handful of these videos, one can see the core influence of Ferris Bueller on certain themes that return constantly regarding what I think is helpful and not helpful in society today. To quote directly,
"Isms, in my opinion, are not good."
What people do not realize is that Ferris's final breaking of the fourth wall, nestled in the part of the film that younger folks might believe was actually invented by the Marvel movie universe,
You're still here. It's over. Go home.
was actually a Rashi quote dealing with a verse from Parshat Devarim. Well, okay, not really, but kind of. So let's back up a bit. Imagine that you were one of the lucky ones to have seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off in the movie theater. You've heard some rumor that you should stay past the credits. Once again, you younger folk, I understand that nowadays this is self-evident, but I had an 8-track player still when Ferris came out, so times they have changed. You get to the closing credits, and the experience of seeing Ferris's little rant for the first time just added the stamp of perfection on what for many of us was set and perhaps still is, in a pantheon that included such masterpieces as The Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink. Ducky, of course, also a prophet, shall get his own moment in a later video, but not now. Sorry, Ducky.
Do I offend?
Ferris's stamp of perfection, however, contains a spiritual truth. That is, if we allow ourselves to look around once in a while, lest we miss it. Ferris's spiritual truth? He tells us to go home. The movie's over. The time of one thing has ended. It's the time for one part of our life to end and another part to begin. Why are we still here? Now, this is only half of the overall wisdom, but let's back up into Torah for a second and at least get this first one. Parshat Devarim, the first Torah portion in Sefer Devarim, or the book of Deuteronomy, consists mostly of a 36-day sermon given by Moses before his death and the subsequent beginning of the narrative conquest of Canaan. So, anyone who thinks these sermons are too long...
A good point there.
This actual series of 3-ish sermons, which, had they been literally given, I imagine, would have been a nice serialized podcast instead of just long sermons, begins with a recounting of events bringing everyone to that moment after 40 years of wandering, then is followed by a re-expression of the law, and is concluded by a lot of reward and punishment theology, topped off by the hopefulness expressed in repentance and forgiveness. Pretty good, clear Jewish and Torah themes. So, if we imagine ourselves there for a moment, there in that place and time, how do you think Moses began all of this? All this 36 days of sermonizing, 36 days of epitomizing, 36 days of trying to include everything. I mean, if you do not have the first few verses of Devarim memorized, pause for a second and think about it. Moses will pass in the narrative in 36 days. He started this role as a leader of the Hebrew people 40 years earlier, pretty much against his will, and he lived through, well, just imagine the worst synagogue congregational or board meeting you can imagine. Multiply that by a lot, add the sand and grit of the desert, and your occasional attempt by folks like the Amalekites to wipe us out, you get the point. Not such a pleasant 40 years, it would seem. And to make it all worse, if you're placing yourself in the role of Moses in your imagination, you do not get the reward of seeing the project through to its glittering goal of the last 40 years, the entrance into the promised land. You lost your temper one too many times, and the Eternal said, nope. So there you are, standing on the ancient Hebrew version of a soapbox, and you have a little over a month to set up the multitudes for success instead of failure. Oh yes, and we, the multitudes, have shown over and over again that we are more than happy to find our way into failure from success. What do you say? What can you possibly say? Well, what Moses said was,
You're still here? It's over. Go home.
Not far off, actually. With all the possibilities, options, and rhetorical devices at his grasp, Moses ascends to the podium and says, Rav lechem shevet bahar hazeh. The Eternal our God addressed us at Horeb, saying, enough of you living at this mountain. Yeah, it's been nice, but now it's time for you to be going. With all that we needed to, and still as humans that fail constantly need to learn, Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu, started out with a pretty hard truth. My mom, when I was quite young, used to describe something she called the 3 warnings of God. When we need to stop doing what we're doing, when we're on the wrong path, when we have overstayed our welcome, when we need to move on, we will understand it in 3 ever-intensing hints from the universe until we finally do it. As I personally am stubborn and have reached level 3 far too often, the way I have personally most often seen these roll out have been step 1 via a trusted voice, step 2 via a warning that costs us something materially or spiritually, step 3 via something that changes our lives, meaning there's no way we can ignore it anymore. No way. Step 1, it's time to move. Step 2, no, it's really time to move on. Step 3, no, you are not paying attention. You will now be forced to move on. You will have no other options. 3 is not fun. Pray we all can listen to that trusted voice and not have to go to steps 2 and 3. 3 especially hurts. Now, the flip side of this coin, the reasons we don't listen to trusted voices or clear instinct or something where we lose a little something, usually comes from the fallacy of the devil you know. We may not like where and who we are, but our tools at fooling ourselves are highly developed. Add to this the common contradiction between stated desires and actual actions. Our desire for adventure stops, for example, right at the doorstep where we actually need to step out and experience it. We hate the unknown and far too often stay far too long in the toxic known. Yet this is a spiritual that in one way or another, many of us have heard, if for no other reason than we have hit step 3 and a few years later are forced to look back and see how we possibly ignored steps 1 and 2. The deeper spiritual lesson, our iterative question, and the more subtle wisdom of Prophet Ferris does, however, lie in a different direction. You see, when Ferris asks us why we were still there and tells us to go home, we laugh because it's both funny and unexpected. What we do not do is leave the theater and say, well, that was in the past and now we have to hate everything about it. We were told to move on. We are now in the process of moving on, so good riddance. Rather, and I do assume this is obvious, we leave with a smile, if not a blessing, for the entertainment we've just witnessed and the movie lines we will get to annoyingly spout at folks both in and out of the joke for the rest of our lives.
They all adore him. They think he's a righteous dude.
Even when the time for something is past, we still get to take it with us and let it elevate us. Lest it seem like I am projecting pop psychology and what the kids today are calling toxic positivity into Torah, I invite you to witness Rashi's surprising teaching moment regarding what Moses meant with Rav Lechem Shevet Bahar Hazeh. Rashi comments, but there is an agadic, a teaching story to help us understand, explanation. And then he quotes this Midrash Agadah, the Eternal has given you much distinction and reward for your having dwelt on this mount. You made the tabernacle, the menorah, and the other sacred articles. You received the Torah. You appointed a Sanhedrin for yourselves, captains over thousands and captains over hundreds. When we read the narrative of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, we read about the Amalekites, plagues, and all the bad board meetings. We also read about the receiving of Torah and the amazing arts and crafts of the Hebrew people and their creativity with groundbreaking law, ethical concepts, wrestling with how to try to get along with each other, sometimes creating things that were really only for that time, sometimes setting in stone something that we still look at today as high above us. We also, as readers of the narrative, fall into the same fallacy of memory that all marketing is crafted to overcome. If you have a good experience, you'll tell 2 or 3 people, and if you have a bad experience, you'll tell 10. I guess I should say, add to that now social media, and it's possible that our good experiences will be quickly forgotten in our haste to forget that people working in service industries are people too, while our bad experiences will be immortalized in negative online reviews meant mostly to tear down and get a pound of flesh for something that may or may not have occurred the way that our most negative thoughts demand it must have. Okay, off my soapbox. The wilderness was the wilderness, with all the negative that implies, with all the sand, with all the grit, with all the not having a permanent place. That wilderness was also necessary, as certain types of learning can only come when we are not set in our place or our ways. Yet, when we leave our personal wilderness, the act of leaving is often bound up in emotions such as shame and guilt. And as these emotions can heighten our most destructive tendencies, we often blot out not only that which we associate with our shame, but as well everything else related to that time. We don't like to remember shame, so we block it all out. In other words, we indeed blot out Amalek, but in the process as well, forget to celebrate the memory that we were there when Torah was received. The iterative question is obvious, but needs a trick to get to. We must periodically ask what parts of our life that we have left behind have we blotted out in order to not have to dwell in the negativity that necessitated us leaving it behind. To get there, however, we must scan and find places that we simply don't go. Our, I haven't thought about that time in a while, periods neatly buried. And this is important. I fully admit this can be dangerous. And for the first time, I as well recommend that we explore this iterative question with a trusted partner, trusted chavruta, professional help, or all the above. As we seek to open a window of memory into our various years in the wilderness, we will have to finally deal with the unhealed wounds of each of those wilderness periods. This, however, is a feature and not a bug of this iterative question. We as the children of Israel have spent millennia trying to integrate the fullness of what Exodus means into our daily wisdom. The hidden wisdom of the narrative of the wilderness is this very reality. We carry the unhealed from our wilderness with us into our promised lands. But as it is a promised land, it was our goal. We're even less able to deal with the unhealed as we don't want to even acknowledge it's there because it's behind us. We're now in this new place. The movie's over. Darn it, please let me go home. The key, hiding in plain sight, is as magical as dancing to Wayne Newton in a dirndl-laden float in a parade in Chicago. We need to see the trauma of the wilderness through the much distinction and reward, meaning we can see the wilderness through the dry sand and heat, or we can see the wilderness through the receiving of Torah, through the building of the tabernacle, through the building of all of our wonders. Both are true. One of these truths is much healthier. And yet how we actually speak to ourselves? Yes, I made that horrible decision which got me caught up in years of regret. So have we all. Now, I can express this narrative by hating the movie when I leave the theater, or I can carry the best lines with me. The truth of that past is not the leaving of the theater, it's the choice of how to see the time before we left. A statement like, yes, I made a horrible decision, has a completely different effect than moving toward, I had a period where I learned so much about myself and my boundaries. Through everything that went wrong, I now have compassion that I wouldn't have had because I know what it means to hurt and be hurt. Leaving the cinema, the wilderness, that part of our lives, with that second statement, instead of the first, is a celebration of life that allows the wilderness to be filled with the complexity of life rather than the absence of it. It also makes our life in the promised land a bit more rich and honest. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next time.
וקול שופר הריעו לפני המלך אדוני